Cool, thanks for that, George. So, yeah, as we say, we are part of Safe Landing. You can find our website. We're also really keen for you to give us an email or message us on social media or Telegram. If you would like to get involved with any of our thinking, any of our content, or proposing a new topic for another Lunch and Learn in the future. So please do reach out if you're keen to get involved in any way. No matter how big or small, let us know. I'm going to skip kind of some background to Safe Landing because George did um, a good overview there. So what we're going to cover today is electrical vertical takeoff and landing aircraft, and whether these are the kind of climate savior, are they going to solve everything, decarbonize aviation, and are they a good use of resource, time, talent, that sort of thing as well. Um, Background to me, I'm an aerospace engineer. I was working on future technologies at Rolls Royce, including we had quite a bit of discussion around eVTOL back 10 years ago. I was a bit of an advocate for them actually. So I'm going to kind of talk you through this from my perspective and also how my opinion of them has changed over the past 10 years. Um, but that is relatively nuanced. As George said, I don't think there's necessarily a right or a wrong answer with this stuff. What's really important though is that we get into the detail of it and we have these discussions, and we can kind of improve each other's understanding and each other's positions. So really interested to have people contribute their thoughts today as well once you've heard from me. So in the agenda, we're going to cover just what are these aircraft and then some of our positions on them. These are draft positions, they're open for change. Sometimes they're kind of a bit more of a question. And then going to summarize it and we'll get into some discussions. So let's just start off with what are these eVTOL aircraft? So eVTOL stands for electric vertical takeoff and landing. This refers to aircraft that are electrically powered, and generally they're capable of hovering, taking off, landing vertically, much like a helicopter would today. There is like a massive range of concepts, different configurations that are being developed. But just generally, they tend to carry a very few number of passengers, often only two, usually less than five. They're usually marketed as a form of flying taxi for transport within cities, above congested motorways and highways. They often resemble sort of civilian drones. You might have seen like, quadcopters that can be remote controlled, but carrying humans. Usually they have numerous propellers or fans that propel them along and provide thrust. Generally, they are envisaged as a clean and sustainable way of improving travel connectivity, particularly within these like large cities with congested roads and motorways. And they're seen as kind of a way of improving urban mobility, um, and decarbonizing. So just because there's a lot of different acronyms used here, I'm just going to cover a few. But in general, as well as eVTOL, you tend to see something called advanced air mobility. This is a bit of a coverall or future air mobility coverall for everything in this topic. You get urban air mobility, which tends to be flying for like 15 minutes within a city. Regional air mobility, which is more like maybe an hour between cities. Yeah, used between rather than within cities. And often they're just called flying taxis or air taxis as well. Although obviously you could call an existing helicopter this. So this is why we've got these other terms coming in. So there is a massive number of these aircraft being designed. This website keeps track of all of the concepts. Apparently we're at 1,000 as of the start of this year. So there's a huge number. They are very different sizes, shapes, and configurations. And I'll try and just explain some of the basics here to begin with. But you are seeing this kind of evolution where there's a lot of different concepts emerging. Some of these will die off, some of them will be more successful. That's quite interesting in itself, to see what will win in different use cases as well. But yeah, just to kind of split these up, we've obviously got helicopters on the left, traditionally fossil fuel powered, usually gas turbines. That goes to usually a single rotor that is large for maximum hover efficiency, with maybe a smaller rotor on the tail um, for for maneuvering in other directions. That will then tilt as it flies, which isn't very efficient, and you're also limited on speed. It's expensive because you've got these gas turbines. Often there's two small gas turbines. That isn't that efficient. You've got a gearbox because you want to run your gas turbine at constant speed, and you need to vary the speed of the rotor. You've got quite complex mechanisms in the gearbox and also in the tilting of the propellers. So um, they're versatile, they're useful, they're relatively niche when it comes to transporting civilians, though obviously we use them for all sorts of other things. Now, what we're getting in eVTOL is we've got some that we call wingless, multicopter. So it's basically like a helicopter, but you go to electric motor driving propellers instead, and you go for loads of these. Um, Now, the advantage here is electric motors are small, simple, and relatively cheap. Because of this, you can have lots of them. You couldn't do this with gas turbines. You could, but it would be incredibly expensive and complicated. With electric motors, it's a lot easier. Now, if one of these fails, if you've got 10 rotors, then it's less of an issue. You've got volocopter are doing a multicopter. You then have powered lift, and that's sort of split into three different categories. Vectored thrust is where you have propellers that face up the way during takeoff and landing, and then they swivel to point forwards in forward flight. An example of that is jobby aviation. Um, Often the wing tilts as well. Then you've got independent thrust. That's where you've got some rotors that are used for takeoff and landing in hover. Those rotors then get fixed into place during cruise, and a different rotor, like at the back of the aircraft, is used for forward flight. And then you've got a combined thrust where you've got some rotors that move um, and tilt, and other ones that just stay and are just for vertical. So there's a whole spread of different options here. Vertical Aerospace in the UK, I think, do one like this. It's a little bit hard to see from this diagram, so I'll show you a moving animation in a second. But as you can see, we don't really know what the most successful option is going to be, and probably different use cases will give different best uses. So let's cover our positions on these aircraft. As I say, these are draft. They are not set in stone, and they're open for discussion and debate. So please don't think that we're being definitive with any of this stuff. The first thing I just want to point out is that these aircraft are cool. If you are just a normal human being, but particularly if you're an aviation geek and you're looking at this stuff, you can see why it excites people. You can see why it excites the general public at large. You can see why wealthy investors like the idea of these aircraft and are giving lots of money towards them. So let's just take a look at a couple. This is Archer Aerospace. This is their Midnight aircraft. It's got the kind of combined thrust. We don't. I suspect that it won't look quite as sleek and shiny as this in final configuration once it gets certified, but it does look like something from Batman. This is vertical aerospace in the UK. As I say, they've got propellers that tilt at the front and provide takeoff, and then they go back into horizontal position for cruise. Again, looks like something out of science fiction film. Can I go to the next slide? So one question we've got here is, are these aircraft the best use of sustainable aviation finance? Just to give you a overview of this, as is advanced air mobility funding. I think this was from a few months ago. You can see that Jobby Aviation, Lilium Archer and Beta have all got $1 billion or more towards them. In the case of Jobby, almost 2.5 billion. This is a lot of money that could go a long way if used somewhere else. At the moment, there's about 5 to 6 billion in total that's been put into funding eVTOLs. In effect, eVTOL startups have raised over twice as much funding as electric and hydrogen aircraft startups and sustainable aviation fuel companies combined. So this just gives you a scale of the kind of dynamic that's going on here. There's a massive sort of money pot going towards these types of aircraft, and very little going to other sectors of sustainable aviation. And I think while we think that these aircraft are cool, while we think they aren't necessarily like that much of a bad thing, and they will provide some benefits, this is one of the main things that we would question in terms of the amount of funding and the benefit to decarbonisation and the benefit to aviation workers as well. So again, just on the positive side, I do think these type of aircraft could benefit electric aviation development in general. And this is part of the reason why I myself was an advocate for them at my former company. I felt like there will be excitement around these. I didn't think it was the most sustainable way to travel, but I did think that it would lead the way and develop some of these electrical systems that could then be used in more efficient, more sensible aircraft. And I do think there's value in that argument. So, electrification is the ultimate goal in decarbonisation, whether you're looking at transport, whether you're looking at industry, buildings, anything. Electrification is efficient. If we can have battery electric powered anything, then you're minimizing energy lost, and you're really helping with decarbonisation. The problem is it is just difficult in aviation, and because of the weight of batteries and electric systems, and we need to certify them. So proving the way is good. So these do need to be designed, developed, tested, certified for safe and efficient aviation use. We need looking at the battery systems, the electric motors, the transmission systems between those, so like the cables, the wiring, everything, the electrical control units, the list goes on. Currently, these companies are leading the way in many respects when we look at how these technologies are progressing in terms of them being certified, because there's so many different companies that are pushing on certification. No doubt we will learn things along the way and that can be used elsewhere. However, this is really because such a large amount of funding is going there, and they're receiving far more than anyone else. Obviously, if that funding was going to fixed wing electric aircraft, then they would be the ones leading the way and also maybe wasting less money on really complex control systems. So more on that later. Right, so now we get into some of the issues with these aircraft. The first thing is just they are fundamentally inefficient. So we tend to see these comparisons, eVTOL versus a helicopter. It's going to be a lot quieter, more reliable, safer, less expensive. Now, this is compared to a helicopter, which is an expensive thing to do. eVTOL do cater to a niche area. It's short journeys where you can take off and land on relatively small areas like helipads, basically what we do with a helicopter journey today. And the idea with this is it will make them very flexible. You can fly into the middle of a city, from the outskirts right into the center. It's difficult to do that if you need to build a long runway. So they're kind of going for flexibility and versatility, but when you do that, you sacrifice efficiency. Now, the idea is that eVTOL will revolutionize this market through electrification, basically because these electric motors are small, simple, and cheap. It makes it a lot easier than the complex mechanical system with a gas turbine. Recharging is also cheaper than burning fuel. Because the rotors are smaller, they have lower tip speed, they should be quite a lot quieter. That also should be lower emissions and pollution than running a helicopter. However, all of that compromises the aircraft design efficiency in order to meet these energy intense vertical takeoff and landing requirements. So the fact that you're trying to take off and land vertically will mean that you become more inefficient and energy intensive. So just to give you a comparison from an aerospace engineering perspective here, eCTOL is conventional takeoff and landing, VTOL is vertical takeoff. So the first thing, if you look at the front, you've got on the left, conventional aircraft, electric, clean geometry, minimum drag. On the right, you've got complex geometry. That's maximum drag. Obviously, it looks relatively aerodynamic, but you've got lots of different features. Those are all creating turbulence. They're all cutting into your laminar flow, and they're increasing drag and increasing energy use. Again, you've got with fixed wing, you've got an aircraft that's really well optimized for an efficient cruise operation. This is where aircraft are most efficient. Part of the efficiency of aircraft come from cruising at higher altitude where there's lower drag and you can be as efficient as possible. With a vertical takeoff, you're compromised at cruise, and also you're compromised at takeoff and landing because you're trying to design for cruise as well. You spend a lot of time in climb, cruise, and landing, and not that much time at cruise. So with conventional, you can have much higher passenger numbers. This is good for load factor, it's good for efficiency. Low passenger numbers for vertical takeoff and landing does the reverse. You're at the cruise for longer with conventional, you're not at cruise for long with vertical. So these are all not good things from an engineering energy perspective. Now, really because of this, they're then not an effective mass transit solution. It's not to say they won't be used for transiting small amounts of people, probably wealthy people that can pay for a more energy intensive mode and want that flexibility. But when we're talking about revolutionizing urban mobility, I think we need to be asking questions. Now, there's a clear kind of priority in this. I mean, obviously, we want to be having active travel where we can. If we're using a car, we also want to be maximizing utilization in the car, having lots of people in it rather than single occupancy cars. Buses and trains are on the ground and are really efficient uses of electricity, high load factors. And then you've got conventional electric and then vertical takeoff electric. Now, we can reduce city traffic, congestion, energy use, and pollution by electrifying our ground transport, by replacing single occupancy cars with car sharing, active transport, public transport. And we can use the buses, coaches, and trains and conventional fixed wing aircraft for longer journeys. That's how we get improve our mass transit system. Now, don't really think that they're going to decrease urban emissions. The argument is that they can take certain journeys out and people will be able to leave on a helipad and get somewhere outside of the city, and that will take cars off the road and improve congestion. But the reality is you really want to be using public transport where you can. This is just a quote from Vertical Aerospace. Quite a revolution in urban mobility is underway. It'll take us into the future. That way forward is up. Now, this is an example from their website. There's different ones in different countries, but this one's in London, Battersea to London Heathrow. So I've been to the centre of London. I've been out to Heathrow. I know you can take the tube and then you can take the train. It's quick, it's low energy, it's easy, and it's accessible. Now they're claiming rather than take the train, which takes an hour, they can get you there in 8 minutes. I also think that's a bit disingenuous when you can include the other factors in that system. This is Archer. This is looking at downtown Manhattan in New York to Newark Airport that's outside of New York. And you can obviously take the train, you can drive, or they're saying you can fly, and similar, an hour on the train, 9 minutes. Now, the thing about this is you obviously have to actually order a taxi, get to the vertiport, board your aircraft. The flight, which might take 10 minutes, is there. You then need to disembark, and then you need transport to your final destination as well. This was a study just looking at Munich Airport to the center of Munich. Sure, you've got that 10-minute flight, but actually 10 minutes becomes more like 26 minutes when you include that stuff. So it's not so much of a saving as it seems, but it is faster, but it's a lot more energy intensive. Archer, this is them looking at Los Angeles. You can see that Los Angeles Airport is a major hub here. They're also going to different sports stadiums and the university. And they're going to Van Nuys, which is a private jet airport. So you can see that maybe private jet users might fly into Van Nuys, take an eVTOL to LAX, and then fly long haul to Heathrow, and they can do that a lot quicker. What's that going to do to aviation emissions overall? Now, I've been to LA myself. I tried to use public transport there, and people were kind of a bit horrified at me doing that. I also took the train to San Diego, which wasn't it was a bit of a slightly joke train. So I think just when it comes to America, we need to improve your public transport, rather than look at these kind of crazy technological ways to try and avoid doing that. So we think they actually might increase aviation emissions. I've alluded to this already, but one of the main use cases you see from this is getting from a large long-haul airport into the center of the city quickly. You can imagine people flying into Munich for the day, flying into the center, doing some business deals and flying out. Do we really want to be encouraging this and making it easier? Um, if you look at where eVTOLs sit, they sit in a range that will be competing with ground transport or helicopter, not competing with long range air transport. We think that the limited payload and range of these means they'll just be short trips. They won't be effective decarbonisation of the most polluting sectors of air travel. In fact, as I say, these are competing with taxi, bus, train to final destination. They're not competing with long haul air travel, which is producing most aviation emissions. And actually, they might supercharge these emissions because they make airports more accessible, and they encourage people to take day trips or weekend trips. We don't think that they will democratize air travel either. If you look at conventional versus vertical, you've probably got a lower cost for the aircraft if you've got fixed wing, a lot less complexity, a lot less cost. Energy intensity is lower, so your fuel costs are likely going to be lower. Certification, more likely to be simple, less costly. That helps the aircraft cost. A lot more complex if you've got lots of moving parts. Operation itself is more complex with vertical takeoff and landing. And then, so all of these things sum up to be, if you want to, if you're looking at Africa, and you wanted to improve connectivity there, I would be looking at the left rather than the right, personally. So, final thing, getting near the end here, we don't think it's necessarily the best use of time or talent within the aviation sector. So, as we say, most finance in this area is being directed towards eVTOL startups. That will provide some benefit towards electric aircraft R&D as a whole. However, public and private finance is limited. We don't have infinite pots of money, particularly at the moment. That means we're losing focus on other areas of aviation development, and that causes issues. So firstly, time. We've only got 10 years, probably less before we blow our carbon budget. We really need to develop like the true solutions quickly if we want to be able to fly in the future. Next is talent. We're always complaining that there's a lack of STEM, science, technology, engineering, maths workers. We need more in the pipeline. Well, this was something that really frustrated me at my company. Some of our best engineering minds were working on this sort of stuff or supersonic aircraft, and they weren't working on the most impactful areas to decarbonize aviation. I think that's a real waste and a real shame. What would be a better use of funding, time, and talent is fixed wing electric aircraft. These also benefit from cheap, simple, distributed electric propellers, but they're more efficient in cruise and they have greater decarbonisation potential because they can go to longer ranges and compete with existing markets. So, summary of our positions. Firstly, they are cool. We can see why people are excited. Yes, they probably can benefit and progress us towards electric aviation. However, they are inefficient. They're more energy intensive than other modes of public transport. Ineffective. They probably won't improve urban pollution. They probably won't reduce aviation emissions. Expensive, compared to other modes of public transport, compared to fixed wing electric aircraft. Not the best use of money. We need to prioritize our funding. I'm not saying that these companies shouldn't be getting any, but the disparity is very large and I think should be questioned. And that kind of involves questioning some of the other things. And that's why we're being a bit critical here. They're also not the best use of time. We really need to prioritize our activities and not the best use of talent. We need to prioritize our workforce. So just to finish on a positive story, If we do focus our funding time and talent and resource towards the most efficient decarbonisation methods, we can make the best use of our aerospace experts. We can design an air transport system that's efficient, more equitable and fair, minimises resource use, and maximises aviation worker employment. And we can secure a livable planet and ensure aviation exists in the future. And yeah, make good, best use of time as well. Don't know why that came in last. So yeah, keen to stop there. Sorry for taking slightly longer. But what would be great now is to get into some discussion about